But let's talk to Nick Dubois, a good friend of the show, author of Confessions of a Recovering MP, former Tory MP, novelist, Renaissance man. Nick, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Mike, and thank you for that generous introduction.
Listen, well, we are nothing but pleased to be in the position that we are in currently when it comes to this ridiculous row that's being cooked up by the EU, isn't it? EU demands British vaccines is on the front page of the Telegraph today. I mean, quite extraordinary what is going on. And I saw your tweet earlier today in which you said that, you know, making these threats and acting like sort of the bully with the big stick is really rather unbecoming a sort of large superstate, isn't it?
Well, it's also pretty stupid because the louder the shouting from the EU members of Parliament, the threats and the bullying, the more exposed the actual EU Commission becomes for its own failings. And frankly, none of that is going to help EU citizens get the vaccination, and calmer heads need to prevail in Brussels. And, you know, it's to the government's credit here at home that they're not responding to these tactics.
And I've heard several MPs this morning and others in the medical professions when asked, should we be giving some of our vaccines to the EU? I'd be quite surprised to hear them all saying absolutely not, you know, because at the moment I can understand why they would say that. But this is kind of a thing that the EU has now created. They've created this animosity between us and them, which really, frankly, maybe was always there, but is now being manifested.
Well, I mean, it's. I think what's rather frustrating is it's kind of, we shouldn't be that surprised about the mess they've got themselves into. I mean, just take a look, for example, at the president of the EU Commission, that big bureaucracy, and a lady called Ursula von der Leyen, who, if you look at her record, she actually presided when she was defense minister in Germany for 5 years over the demise of the German Bundeswehr, the German armed forces. Yeah. And what was her response? It was to blame her predecessors for her failings, which, you know, gets a little difficult after 5 years. But where was the biggest failing? It was in negotiating procurement contracts and the likes of it. So this bureaucratic approach has not served the citizens well. And to your point about should we, if you like, be diverting our pre-ordered, early ordered, well-planned vaccination orders to Europe because of the failings in their own, frankly, negotiations. And let's not forget, they still haven't actually approved the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Well, the answer is no, and it's no for the following reasons. First of all, we have a program for first and second vaccinations based on the supply chain that we have agreed. So it would be interrupting and threatening the well-being of our citizens, which frankly, I don't think anyone around the world would want to necessarily do. But what the government have been clear about, and they made this perfectly clear when they started securing the millions of vaccine jabs, not just from AstraZeneca elsewhere, is that we would make a contribution to those less fortunate countries because we have over-ordered. We are committed to helping deal with this around the world. I just don't think any of us imagined that those countries that would be struggling and who need help from basically the more economically active and successful countries would be the EU.
Yes, well, quite. And what it has shown up, I think, Nick, as well, is the very kind of rigid and inflexible, I should say, model that the EU works within, because one of the biggest problems, and I've said this for a couple of days now, I mean, we're having to struggle with which order we hand out the vaccines in, like do we give it to police officers before we give it to teachers, that kind of thing. Whereas in the EU, they're having to work out which countries get it first, presumably.
Yes, and of course, you know, this is why the statement by I think it's the EU Health Commissioner, I believe, is from Greece.
She's Cypriot, yeah. She's a former psychologist from Cyprus, apparently.
Right, so it's a bit laughable because the opening statement that she actually made was, "We are all united." Well, of course, that is not the case.
No.
And in fairness to many member states, they themselves laughed at that. It is look. This is a very serious issue that the EU citizens find themselves in. There were countries, including Holland, Netherlands, Germany, France, they all agreed originally a contract with AstraZeneca way back in June of last year. They then were effectively talked out of it by the heavy hand of the EU and said, come into our system and we will provide for all. It's clear that even then there was not confidence in Germany, in Holland, in other countries that the EU could deliver. But as ever, they threw their weight around, proclaimed that it was in the interests of unity, and sadly, the people who are losing out at the minute are the EU citizens. And I hope, actually, that we can resolve this problem. Of course, we're not going to concede on looking after our own citizens, given the steps that we've been through, but it doesn't serve our interests to have EU citizens not vaccinated, because actually, we want to go there. We want to do business with these people, and the sooner that we can open up, the better. But the idea that they come in and actually try and ban exports to our country through legal contracts. Can you imagine what those same EU people would be saying if Trump had tried something like this? And if Trump had said, I'm putting America first, they would have been up in arms. So frankly, it's an absurd notion.
Well, it totally is. And even the German media have turned on Ursula von der Leyen, and they've turned on the EU for being useless. And they've actually used the words, now we see why Brexit was a good idea, because they've actually seen through the way that these people operate, and nothing has been more clear that they do operate as a kind of protection racket. And I mean, the idea that they can threaten an international company, pharmaceutical company like AstraZeneca, who have made a contract with us, who are due to deliver that contract, which has presumably been paid for, and they're going to try and get in the way of it.
Yeah, and remember, one of the reasons that AstraZeneca is able to deliver on the UK contract is not only was it agreed a long time ago, it gave 3 months to iron out the glitches in production that were needed to meet the UK schedule. The EU, because they were slow to the table, have not been able to have that period of time, or allowed AstraZeneca that period of time, which is why they are facing glitches in production and causing problems for EU citizens. And now, of course, the EU are putting around a very fatuous claim that the AstraZeneca are obliged, or they've said AstraZeneca are not allowed to make priorities for other countries. That isn't how the contract works, and we should get our share now. Well, look, if you look at the contracts, the one thing it doesn't say, and it's clearly wouldn't be saying in the EU contract, is EU will come above everyone else. Yeah. I mean, it's an illogical position that they have adopted. There's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of ranting going on. They're making themselves look foolish. I suggest calmer heads prevail, and I am sure that the EU citizens will, through that approach, will get a chance to get their vaccines in better speed and delivery than they're getting now.
I seem to remember as well, going back to the end of last year, that when we were busy approving vaccines for use in GP surgeries, in hospitals and care homes, the EU had yet to meet because they were all off. And they hadn't actually got together with their medical people to approve anything because they weren't working.
Well, and what have we learned from this is that actually the equivalent of the Medicines Approval Agency, which of course is no longer in London because it's gone.
Do you remember when they told us when that moved out, that would be the end of medicine in Britain?
Well, I think there's a lot of people looking to Britain and its scientists and its partnership with universities and governments, and rightly are very proud of what's happened over here. But to your wider point, why were we ahead of the curve in the approvals process? Because we worked with the company and the university as they were developing the product. We didn't sit back and let bureaucracy take over and say, well, we'll only examine this when you've finished. And that's one of the reasons we were way ahead of the game. So I hope that there's positive lessons that they can learn in Brussels from what's happened here. And let's not remember another point, because, the time Britain took the decision not to join the EU, even though we were outside the EU, we were invited to join this common procurement program. The government took a lot of hits. They were being told they were being parochial for refusing to do this, that it was just Brexit ideology kicking in because they refused to do this. Well, I hope people will take a look now and say, well, first of all, Boris Johnson took the right decision in his government to actually keep it firmly in the control of the British government. But they can also look at our commitments to helping the wider international community, because we do and will have a lot of vaccines to help other parts of the world speaks to a true global Britain and, frankly, the way it should be done.
Absolutely right. One final question, Nick. What about teachers? Where are you on the vaccination of teachers? Because there seems to be a bit of a row going on between the Labour Party, who want it to be done in the half-term period of February. However, the scientists are saying teachers are really not at any greater risk than anybody else.
Well, look, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this. First of all, is that this is not a political decision who is getting vaccinated. It is actually been taken by a joint vaccination committee that is saying who are the most vulnerable, who are the most exposed. The Labour Party are basically saying, hey, Boris Johnson, override that scientific community who have prioritised the elderly and the most vulnerable and give it to teachers who I'm sure are very deserving, don't get me wrong. But I would ask people to say, well, if you're going to do that, which are the vulnerable groups that are the priority in this country, who are most vulnerable and most at risk, are you going to take that vaccine away from? And I think that question, when that's answered, might be able to move on in this debate. But so far, I think it's right that the government stick to what they've said or what's been recommended by the Joint Vaccines Committee.
Absolutely. Nick Bois, thank you very much indeed. Author of Confessions of a Recovering MP, former Tory MP. I think Nick's absolutely right. The Labour Party, as ever, is being wagged by the tail, which is the unions, of course. The people who say, oh, the teachers are all frightened to go back. Every single teacher that I speak to on this show and outside of this show says they want to go back to work. It's only the unions and the more militant ones who say that teachers are frightened of going back to work. So take out of that what you will. And any idea that comes from Angela Rayner, who, if I may remind you once more, once called a Tory MP scum, I don't think really is worth listening to.